Balancing online and in-person content across the curriculum. So we've always had some virtual content in our curriculum, but then of course the COVID-19 pandemic very, very quickly made us move to almost all online or virtual curriculum. And a lot of asynchronous learning where the students are working on things independently, sort of the flipped classroom idea. We also now have hybrid lectures where we've got our students in the classroom with us if they want. We've also got them on Zoom if that's what they prefer. We've created enormous flexibility for our students. We have moved to some really good teaching paradigms with appropriate use of virtual materials. But questions have arisen among the faculty about what percentage of the curriculum really should be virtual and what percentage really should be hands-on. So there are definitely some pros of that virtual learning. They can access it anywhere. So if they're out of town, if they're sick, if they're providing care for someone, whatever they're doing, the students can access it and the instructors can access it. So if I get called out of town and I have a lecture to give, I can still give it as long as I have access to the internet and Zoom. So there's that great flexibility piece. It gives the students some autonomy, how they want to spend their time. Do I want to come in to the campus today or not? Can I do things virtually, and is that better for me because I have to go to the doctor this afternoon, or whatever they're doing to help manage their life while they're learning. And then finally, for us as an organization, I have to tell you, if I never have to reschedule things for a snow day again, that would make me happy as a clam. So the fact that it gives us that flexibility as a college unit is also very valuable. That's a pro. But there are definitely some cons. So we know that there's a giant social piece to learning. There's that piece about learning from and with your peers. There's that piece about learning how to work with your peers. There's that piece about learning how to go talk to an instructor when you're confused about something or you want to argue a grade. And it's very difficult to mimic that virtually. And so it's important for us to consider the less we see of each other, the less we know each other. And that's important in our students' learning and their development as professionals. Sometimes virtual learning is very difficult for students who have poor time management skills or who are procrastinators or who just really hate the course you're teaching because they don't see that it has value for them. That's very hard to kind of help encourage their motivation if they're distant from you, if they're only on the other side of that computer. We all know what Zoom fatigue is. You can only spend so much time staring at the computer before you just zone out. And physically, it's difficult to maintain that motivation. And then finally, if you do anything that's completely online, it's a lot of work for the instructor. And then you pretty much have to be available all the time by email or in some other way so that they know you're there. So it's a very different way of teaching. And for some people, it's great. And for other people, it's just punishing that they have to be available for the students more of the time. What are the pros of in-person learning? Well, this is that social piece. You're there with your peers, you're there with your instructors, you're asking questions in the moment, you're getting feedback in the moment, you're building relationships, you're learning to work with people that wouldn't ordinarily be people you would hang out with. Just very, very beneficial from the social standpoint and from the learning standpoint. And working regularly together, it keeps all the students on track. You're catching those students that are struggling for whatever reason or falling behind. The cons, they need to plan to get there if there's costs to coming to campus, things of that nature. And then the big one really is the decreased flexibility. Harder for them to live their life, to help other people, to accomplish other things while they're in school because of the very, very tight schedule that we have for them. In one study done during the pandemic, these were undergraduate students, and they asked, what do you like better? Do you like virtual learning or do you like in-person learning? And they said they liked in-person learning because of those social pieces. They didn't know their classmates. They didn't know their instructors. That eased over time. So it suggests that this is perhaps most important very early in the curriculum when that class cohort is getting to know each other, when they're getting to know who the instructors are, and when they're getting to know who can I go talk to, who am I comfortable with, who might be a mentor for me. And so that's something for us to consider. Perhaps we want to think about, well, at least if we're going to have some that's virtual, it probably shouldn't be all of first year because they really need to get to know each other in first year, based at least on this sort of work. A survey of 7,000 students in 17 countries wanted to find out, well, if it's going to be virtual, what do you like about it? What should stay there? And in that survey, the most important things were making sure anything that was recorded was available for them, not just in the moment, but for them to look at later. They really like archived lectures, which we knew already from before the pandemic. They want easy access to online study materials, and they want that flexibility. That is why students value some of this being virtual, or for some students, all of it being virtual. On the flip side, when you ask, well, what don't you like about it? They knew that they were more likely to become distracted. And we all know that from being home during Zoom meetings. Your children are wandering in and out, your dog's wandering in and out. Oh, look, here comes the UPS man. It's just so easy to get distracted. And their students are well aware of that. They also worry about motivation piece. If you never see your instructor, you never really hear your instructor, you're never doing things with your classmates, sometimes it's hard to stay motivated. And some just know that they don't have the personal discipline or the drive to complete a program if it's completely online. Out of that study where they looked at the 7,000 students from the 17 countries, here's the United States, highlighted by the big maroon arrow. And so the concerns of the students in the United States were that the distraction piece, the lack of motivation and getting bored, that they didn't have opportunities to interact with other students, and that they didn't have adequate access to their teachers. Those were their 4 biggest concerns about too much of it being virtual. So right now we are offering them blended learning where they have aspects of both virtual and in-person learning within the curriculum. And the big question is there a good percentage? Is there an ideal percentage of time that they should be in person versus virtual? What are the pros of this kind of a curriculum? Well, again, it's that flexibility piece. It's got to improve their mental health and their work-life balance. They're much better able to take control of their own time, and that is beneficial for the students and for the faculty. It also provides an opportunity for instructors to provide instruction if they're out of town, which gives consistency for the students, that they're not just missing something or getting a step in person that day. It's you and you're still there, you're just doing it from someplace else that day. It really lets a course coordinator be imaginative about how best they present materials in their course. Does everything need to be present or not? Do I want to flip part of it? That sort of thing. It addresses that social aspect of the education by having some in-person pieces. And if we're really looking at universal design and accessibility needs, both at the individual and at the classroom level, the more flexibility we have, the better we can meet those needs. The cons can be difficult to schedule things in a way that's logical for students. And so it's difficult for students, for example, if they're trying to manage something like daycare and they've got labs at weird times that they would be kind of coming and going. They pay for a full day of daycare when really it was an hour here and an hour there. And, that sort of scheduling thing gets to be complex and difficult for them. But overall, the student schedule is much more complex than it was when I went to school. When I went to school, you came to school. And you knew you were going to be there all day, and then you were going to go home from school. And now the student schedules are much more complex, and that adds to that. It's one more thing for them to be keeping track of on top of all the content that they're getting. And then finally, we've had some faculty who teach in the 4th year and feel like students learn from us in the first 3 years. You can come and go as you need to. And then they get to 4th year and they're told, but now you have to be here all the time. And they feel like it's difficult for the students to adjust to that, and it makes them feel like the faculty in 4th year are unfair, even when you let them know, well, you're probably going to have to go all the time for your job next year. It's like they've had this very different life in the first 3 years, and are we helping them or harming them by not making that more of a direct transition by requiring more hands-on or in-person attendance earlier on? What kind of requirements are we under right now? And the answer is really none. So historically, there was talk about a percentage of about 80% being in person, but there is no specific policy that I can find about that anywhere. The Office of Distributed Learning, which is the office that offers and manages virtual coursework for the university, they offer both completely online degrees and blended degrees. And for the blended degrees, it's all over the place. What percent is in person and what percent is virtual? So there is no requirement that I can find of any kind at the university level. The Council on Education, based on how some of the new schools that are being developed are choosing to develop their curriculum, has identified for us the number of weeks students need to be present, and the clinical year needs to be 40 weeks of hands-on instruction. There's no doubt that that is expected to be summative and formative both, that it is creating an opportunity for them to learn, to get feedback, and it is pulling together the disparate things that they've learned in the first 3 years in a way that allows us to say, yes, you are competent and can do these things. And the only way that can be done is for them to be working with us, seeing cases with us, answering questions with us, working directly on materials with us as instructors. And so our accreditor has made it very clear that they need to be hands-on with us for 40 weeks of their senior year. Other than that, they generally are not as worried about what is offered virtually or in person, but they definitely want that feedback piece, and they definitely want faculty availability. They worry about things like students getting things that virtual from someone who doesn't even work at your university, and then how does that student follow up if they're confused? So again, they're not giving us a ton of hard and fast numbers, and they're not giving us a percentage, but there is a recognition that we have to have enough to be able to say we can really assess that student, and we really are providing that student with the feedback that they need. Right now, we have an attendance policy that allows us as instructors and course coordinators to say that in-person attendance is required. We are asking as a college that that happen for very specific reasons. Obviously, hands-on laboratories, we need them there. Obviously, for clinics, we need them there. For group exams, they all should be in the group. For guest lectures, it's nice for that guest lecturer if there are people in the room when they come, and so they can ask questions before that person leaves. For small group activities, you can do them online, but we're finding more and more that if you're the only instructor in the room, you can't manage both in-person groups and online groups, and so you could ask for them to all be in person for that. The reason we don't make the attendance policy say, well, everybody can say they can be there for everything, is that if there's really no great reason for them to be in the room, why would we ask them to be in the room? And if it's just because we like lecturing to a full room, that's a poor reason. So this is to help us all think wisely about why we might require them all to come in person. If you have any questions or comments or concerns that weren't addressed, please contact the CVM Education Support Group at cvmces@umn.edu.